Welcome to our channel, your gateway to the most spine-chilling tales and unnerving true stories. Today, we present a harrowing true story, The Cabin in the Woods. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor as Jake, a seasoned camper, prepared for his annual solo trip to the secluded woods. He'd been coming to this particular spot for years, and despite the warnings of a supposedly haunted cabin nearby, he always felt undeterred. The cabin was said to be cursed, the site of countless unexplained disappearances and unspeakable horrors, but Jake knew better. He'd always been careful, always respectful of the woods and its inhabitants. He carefully packed his backpack with essentials: a tent, sleeping bag, cooking supplies, a flashlight, matches, and a small first aid kit. As he strapped it on, he couldn't help but feel a thrill of anticipation. The air was crisp and clean, the trees towering around him like ancient sentinels. Despite the warnings, he couldn't help but feel at home here. Finally, he set off towards the cabin, picking his way through the underbrush with practiced ease. The path was well-worn, and he knew it like the back of his hand. As he rounded a bend, the cabin came into view, its weathered timbers almost invisible beneath the vines and ivy that cloaked its walls. The front door stood ajar, creaking gently in the breeze. Jake hesitated for a moment, glancing around uneasily. The forest seemed to press in on him, the whispers of the trees filling his ears. But he shook off the unease and stepped forward, entering the cabin. The interior was cool and dim, the only light filtering through the grimy windows and the crack between the door and the frame. He set about building a fire in the stone fireplace, using his hatchet to chop kindling from dead branches. The sound of wood beating would echo through the cabin, and as the flames finally caught, he sighed contentedly, sitting back on his haunches. As the fire crackled, he pulled out a can of beans from his backpack and began to cook dinner, humming a tune under his breath. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness descended upon the forest, something changed. The air grew thick with a foul stench that made Jake's stomach turn, and the whispers that had been in the back of his mind since he'd arrived seemed to grow louder, more insistent. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, but the more he tried to ignore it, the more he felt like he was being watched. Finally, he could take it no more. He set his half-eaten dinner aside and stood up, walking over to the window. The cabin's curtains were drawn, but through the gaps he could see the trees swaying outside, their branches clawing at the air. A shiver ran down his spine as he realized that the stories about the cabin might be true, and that he was in grave danger. Just then, the cabin door slammed shut behind him, trapping him inside. The room grew colder, the shadows seeming to dance menacingly. Jake's heart hammered in his chest as he tried to find some way out, but every window and door was firmly locked. As he spun around in circles, searching for some clue as to what was happening, a voice whispered from the darkness, "Welcome home." Jake froze, his heart stopping in his chest. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice trembling. But there was no answer, only the sound of the fire crackling and the whispers of the trees. With a shudder, he realized that he was alone, and that the only way out was to face whatever horrors the cabin had in store for him. As the first rays of dawn pierced the treetops, Jake stumbles out of the woods and into a small clearing. His heart pounds in his chest as he surveys the sight before him. Dozens of cabins, all eerily similar to the one he's just escaped, huddled together like ghostly sentinels in the mist. He realizes with a sickening certainty that the haunting extends far beyond the cabin he originally found. The feeling of being watched intensifies with every step he takes. Jake's mind races as he tries to process the implications of his discovery. Could it be some sort of cursed village, hidden deep within the woods? A collective nightmare shared by countless campers over the years? Or perhaps something more sinister, something beyond his comprehension? Shivering in his damp clothes, he wonders how many others have ventured into this twisted version of paradise, only to disappear without a trace. Deciding that he must find help, Jake picks his way through the overgrown clearing, careful not to disturb the eerie stillness that pervades the air. As he nears one of the cabins, he hears a faint rustling coming from within. His heart leaps into his throat, but he steels himself, forcing his trembling hands to remain at his sides. With a deep breath, he pushes open the creaky door and steps inside. The cabin is exactly as he left it, dusty and abandoned, with cobwebs dancing in the sunlight that streams through the windows. Yet there is an unsettling feeling of presence here, as if someone, or something, is waiting for him. Jake's eyes dart nervously around the room, landing on a battered journal resting on a rickety table. Unable to resist its siren call, he crosses the room and picks it up, opening it to the first page. The journal is filled with cryptic entries detailing the experiences of its previous owner, a young woman named Emily. She writes of strange whispers in the night, unseen figures lurking in the shadows, and a malevolent presence that seems to grow stronger with each passing day. As he reads on, Jake feels a growing sense of kinship with Emily, a desperate need to understand what happened to her and why. Deciding that he must find more information, Jake resolves to search the other cabins. He moves through them with a sense of urgency, his heart pounding in his chest as he catalogs the evidence of the horrors that have taken place here. In one cabin, he finds a makeshift shrine, adorned with charred offerings and twisted trinkets, while in another, he stumbles upon a chilling sight, the mutilated remains of a deer, arranged in a gruesome tableau on the floor. The smell of copper fills the air, and he knows without a doubt that this place is not safe for anyone, much less himself. As the sun begins to set once more, Jake's hopes of escaping dwindle with each passing moment. He knows that he must find help soon, or he'll share the same fate as Emily and all the others who have come before him. His only solace is the knowledge that he has found something, a thread, however faint, that might lead him to the truth behind the haunting. And with that determination burning bright in his heart, he sets off once more into the unforgiving wilderness, searching for a way out of this living nightmare. As Jake steps out of the sheriff's car, he takes a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The small town seems peaceful enough, but he knows that the horrors he experienced in the cabin have followed him. The elderly woman who gave him a ride waves goodbye, offering a reassuring smile before driving off. The sheriff, a burly man with a weathered face and kind eyes, leads Jake towards his cruiser. "So, Mr. Jake," the sheriff begins, his voice calm but measured, "you say you've seen some strange things out there in those cabins." Jake nods, his throat tight. "Look, son, I've heard my fair share of tall tales, but I can't just send a bunch of men out there without knowing what we're dealing with. I need more than just your word." Jake understands the sheriff's skepticism. He knows that no one would believe his story without proof. But he's seen things, felt things, that he can't shake off. "I know it sounds crazy, Sheriff, but I swear to you, those cabins are not safe. Whatever's in there, it's evil. It's like nothing I've ever encountered before." The sheriff considers this for a moment, then nods. "All right, Jake, I'm going to take you back out there, but I want you to understand the risks. Once we're in there, we're on our own. There's no guarantee we'll make it out alive." Jake swallows hard, feeling a knot forming in his stomach. He knows the sheriff is right, but he can't leave the others to suffer. They drive in silence for a while, the radio playing old country tunes softly in the background. The forest looms larger with each passing mile, its trees towering like sentinels guarding a long-forgotten secret. The sheriff parks the cruiser at the edge of the clearing, and they both step out, weapons drawn. The air is thick with tension, and Jake can feel his heart hammering against his ribcage. "You lead the way, son," the sheriff says, trusting Jake's memory to guide them back to the cabin. They move through the forest together, their boots crunching on dead leaves and twigs. The farther they go, the more Jake's nerves begin to unravel. The whispers from before have grown louder, and the stench of rot fills the air. Finally, they arrive at the cabin. The sheriff pauses for a moment, surveying the structure with a critical eye. "You're sure this is the one, Jake?" he asks, his voice barely above a whisper. Jake nods, his throat tight. "This is it," he manages to say. They approach the cabin together, their weapons at the ready. The sheriff reaches out to try the door, but it's already open. They exchange worried glances before stepping inside. Immediately, the cold air hits them like a brick wall, and the foul stench is almost overwhelming. The cabin is exactly as Jake left it, but something feels off. The whispers seem louder, the shadows more menacing. Jake and the sheriff move through the cabin, searching for any signs of the others or the source of the haunting. They open doors, flip switches, and check closets, but everything appears to be empty and abandoned. As they move deeper into the cabin, they realize that the haunting extends beyond the walls, into the very woods themselves. The trees seem to sway and bend in ways they shouldn't, as if they're trying to warn them away. Suddenly, the sheriff grabs Jake's arm, pointing to a strange, glowing symbol etched into the floorboards. "What's this?" he whispers. Before Jake can answer, the symbol begins to pulse within a natural light, and a low, rumbling growl echoes through the cabin. They both know that whatever is causing this, it's far beyond anything they could have ever prepared for. As the symbol continues to glow brighter, Jake feels a strange energy coursing through his veins, filling him with a sense of power he's never experienced before. He looks at the sheriff, seeing the same thing happening to him. They share a brief moment of understanding before charging forward, ready to confront whatever evil lies before them. Together, they race towards the source of the energy, their bodies burning with a divine fire. The cabin shakes with each step they take, the walls groaning in protest. The glowing symbol grows larger and brighter, illuminating the darkness around them like a beacon. As they approach, they see it's not a symbol at all, but a gateway to another world. A world of darkness and madness. With a final burst of strength, they tear open the gateway, stepping through into the unknown. The world beyond is a nightmare landscape of twisted trees and writhing shadows. The air is thick with the stench of rot and the whispers of ancient horrors. But Jake and the sheriff stand together, their weapons drawn, ready to face whatever horrors await them. And so begins their descent into the abyss, their quest to find the others and put an end to the evil that plagues this place. The road ahead is dark and treacherous, but they have each other. They are no longer alone. They are the chosen ones, and they will face the darkness together, until the end. Jake followed the sheriff back to the cabin, his heart racing with a mix of anticipation and fear. The sheriff's truck rumbled up the dirt road, the headlights illuminating the eerie silhouettes of the abandoned cabins in the distance. As they pulled up to the cabin, Jake could feel the weight of the night pressing down upon him. The sheriff hopped out of the truck and motioned for Jake to follow, their boots crunching on the gravel as they made their way to the front door. The cabin looked exactly as Jake had left it, the candles still flickering on the windowsills and the fireplace crackling softly. But the sheriff didn't waste any time, barging right in and sweeping his flashlight across the room. "Looks like you weren't the first one to find this place," he muttered, his voice tinged with concern. Jake nodded, his throat tight. As they searched the cabin, the sheriff took meticulous notes and photographs, examining every nook and cranny. He paused when they reached the back bedroom, frowning at the strange symbols etched into the wooden floorboards. "This doesn't look good," he muttered under his breath. Jake swallowed hard, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Finally, the sheriff spotted a hidden compartment behind a painting on the wall. Inside was a dusty, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The sheriff carefully extracted it and sat down on the edge of the bed to examine it. "This might hold some answers," he said, opening the journal and beginning to read. As the sheriff pored over the journal, Jake leaned in to hear him, his heart pounding in his ears. The writing was cryptic and arcane, but the sheriff seemed to understand it, translating aloud as he went. The story it told was chilling. Centuries ago, a powerful witch had been condemned to death for her crimes. Before she was executed, she cursed the land, vowing to return from beyond the grave to wreak vengeance upon those who had wronged her. It seemed that the cabin Jake had stumbled upon was merely one of many victims in the witch's twisted game of vengeance. The spirits of those who had perished in the cabins were trapped here, their eternal suffering serving as a conduit for the witch's malevolent energy. The journal detailed numerous rituals and incantations that had been used to bind the witch to this realm, but it was clear that they were no longer effective. As they continued to read, the sheriff and Jake began to formulate a plan to try and stop the witch's reign of terror. They knew that they would need the help of experts in the field of the supernatural, and that they would likely face grave danger along the way. But they also knew that they couldn't just leave the innocent people who lived in these cabins at the mercy of this ancient evil. Finally, they reached the end of the journal, and the sheriff closed it with a sigh. "We've got our work cut out for us," he said solemnly. "But I'm glad we found this. It's going to take all of our combined knowledge and courage to put an end to this." Jake nodded, his resolve strengthened by the sheriff's words. "Let's get started," he said, steeling himself for the battle that lay ahead. Together, they packed up their gear and left the cabin, making their way back to the sheriff's truck. As they drove away, the last rays of the setting sun cast eerie glow over the abandoned cabins, making them seem even more sinister and foreboding. But Jake knew that they would not be defeated. They had a plan, and they would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The road stretched out before them, winding through the dense forest like a ribbon of dusty gold. Ahead lay the town, and beyond that, the world. But for now, their focus was on the task at hand, saving the innocent souls trapped in the haunted cabins, and putting an end to the ancient evil that threatened to consume them all. The morning sun peeks through the trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Jake and the sheriff stand beside each other, their shoulders slumped in exhaustion. They spent the entire night performing rituals and readings, their voices chanting and reciting ancient incantations until they were hoarse. The local priest, a kind-faced man with a serene demeanor, stands nearby, his hands clasped in prayer. They're all aware that this could be their final chance to rid the world of the ancient spirit that has plagued these woods for centuries. The air feels thick with tension, and each of them can sense the spirit's growing anger. As they finish the final words of the ritual, a blinding flash of light fills the cabin, and the room begins to shake violently. Objects fly through the air, smashing into walls and furniture. The cabin creaks and groans, as if it's about to give way at any moment. Jake's heart pounds in his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He feels a sudden surge of adrenaline course through his veins, pushing him to action. He grabs one of the fallen candles and begins to run around the room, lighting every candle he can find. The sheriff, meanwhile, rushes to the window, throwing it open to let in some fresh air. The stifling heat of the cabin has become almost unbearable, and the smell of burning wood and incense fills the air. As he looks out into the forest, he sees that the trees are swaying violently, their branches thrashing about as if in a furious rage. The priest steps forward, his hands raised in a gesture of protection. His face is etched with determination, but there's a hint of fear in his eyes. The spirit is strong, he murmurs, his voice barely audible above the commotion. But we have prepared for this moment. We must hold on. Jake nods in agreement, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames of the candles. He can feel the energy in the room building, the tension growing tighter with each passing second. Suddenly, a deafening roar fills the air, and the cabin is plunged into darkness. The sound of the spirit's anguished howls echoes through the trees, reverberating deep in their bones. They stand together, the three of them, their shoulders touching, as the cabin creaks and groans around them. For what feels like an eternity, they wait in the darkness, their hearts bounding, their breaths ragged and shallow. But finally, the howls subside, and the cabin grows quiet once more. Jake takes a tentative step forward, feeling his way through the darkness. His hand brushes against something warm and soft, and he realizes that it's the sheriff, leaning against him for support. The priest, meanwhile, has collapsed to the floor, his chest heaving as he struggles to catch his breath. Slowly, the sheriff raises his head, meeting Jake's gaze. In the dim light filtering in through the window, they can just make out each other's faces. "Well, kid," the sheriff says, his voice rough from exhaustion, "I guess that's one ghost story we can tell around the campfire from now on." There's a hint of a smile on his lips, but there's also a depth of relief and gratitude that Jake hasn't seen in his eyes since they first stepped foot into the cabin. Jake nods, his own smile growing. "Yeah," he says, "I guess it is." He turns to the priest, who is still catching his breath. "Thank you, Father," he says, "for everything you've done." The priest manages a weak smile in return. Outside, the sun continues to rise, casting a warm golden light through the trees. The forest stretches out before them, peaceful and serene once more. But they all know that they'll never forget what they've been through, or the spirit they've managed to defeat. As they step out of the cabin, they leave the darkness behind, ready to face whatever challenges the world has in store for them. The aftermath of their successful battle with the ancient spirit lingers in the air. Jake and the sheriff exchange weary glances, their hearts still racing from the ordeal. The one-story cabin now lies quiet and still, the air heavy with a sense of relief. The local priest, visibly exhausted but satisfied, nods his approval at the duo. "You did it," he whispers, his voice barely audible above the settling dust. "You freed this place from its torment." Outside, the townspeople begin to gather, drawn by the commotion and the news of their saviors. They approach cautiously, their eyes wide with fear and awe. Jake and the sheriff exchange nods, knowing that the horror they have experienced will be forever etched into their memories. "Jake," the sheriff says, his voice firm but gentle, "you didn't have to come back for me. I could have handled it on my own." "No," Jake replies, his voice steady despite the tremor in his limbs. "We faced this together, and we'll face whatever comes next together too." The townspeople murmur their agreement, their faces pale in the dim light of dusk. The sheriff clears his throat, addressing the crowd. "I want to thank you both for what you've done," he says, his voice strong and clear. "Your bravery and determination have saved this town from a fate worse than any of us could have imagined." As the sheriff speaks, Jake glances over the crowd, searching for a familiar face. He spots her at the back, her features illuminated by the flickering flames of the torches. Her eyes meet his, and for a brief moment, they share a look that speaks of understanding, of shared experience, and of the knowledge that what they've been through will change them forever. The sheriff concludes his speech, and the townspeople disperse, heading back to their homes and families. Jake and the sheriff exchange one last look before parting ways, each knowing that the other will forever bear the burden of what they've seen and done. As Jake walks away, he can't help but feel a strange mix of relief and unease. He knows that the spirit may be gone, but its influence on the town and its people will linger for a long time to come. He wonders how many more nights he'll lie awake, haunted by the whispers in the darkness and the shadows that dance at the corners of his eyes. But for now, he allows himself a moment of peace. He's brought hope back to this town, and for that, he'll always carry a small sliver of light within his heart. As he disappears into the gathering darkness, the faintest hint of a smile plays at the corners of his lips. For the first time in days, he feels like he might just be able to sleep. The sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky a deep shade of crimson and purple. Jake stands before the cabin, his heart racing, his palms sweaty. He can't shake the feeling that the cabin is watching him, waiting for him to return. The wind picks up, rustling the leaves and sending shivers down his spine. It's been months since he left the cabin, since he first set foot on the path that led him here. Months of trying to forget the whispers in the night, the feeling of being watched, the cold touch of something unseen. He takes a deep breath and approaches the cabin door, hesitating for a moment before pushing it open. The familiar musty scent of damp wood and mold greets him, mingling with the memories of his time here. He steps inside, the flickering light from a single candle casting eerie shadows across the room. The fireplace crackles softly, the flames dancing in the hearth, but there's an unsettling chill in the air that no amount of fire can dispel. Jake walks slowly through the cabin, his footsteps echoing on the creaky floorboards. He inspects each room, searching for any sign that the spirit has returned, that it hasn't really left him alone. He finds nothing out of the ordinary, but still, he can't shake the feeling that the cabin is different somehow. It's as if it knows he's back, and it's welcoming him with open arms. He paces back and forth in the main room, his eyes darting from one shadowy corner to another, when suddenly, he hears it. A faint whisper on the wind, carried on the breeze through the open window. At first, he thinks it's just the trees, rustling in the night, but as it grows louder, he realizes it's different this time. It's not the wind, it's not the trees. It's the spirit, taunting him. Jake, it whispers, its voice like ice water dripping down his spine. Jake, you can't escape me. You belong here with me. He spins around, his heart pounding in his chest, and sees it. The spirit stands in the doorway, its ethereal form flickering in and out of existence, its translucent fingers grasping at the air. Its features are twisted into a malicious grin, and its eyes burn with an unholy light. No, Jake whispers, taking a step back. I don't belong with you. I'm not coming back. The spirit laughs, a chilling cackle that sends shivers down Jake's spine. Oh, but you are, my dear Jake. You are. Jake feels a tear trickle down his cheek. He knows the spirit is right. He can feel himself being drawn back in, like a moth to a flame. But he also knows that he has to try, has to fight against it. He turns and flees from the cabin, sprinting through the woods, his heart racing, his lungs burning. He doesn't stop running until he reaches the outskirts of town, collapsing to the ground, his chest heaving. He looks back over his shoulder, but the cabin is gone, replaced by the familiar houses and street lamps. The spirit has won this round, but Jake refuses to give up. He'll find a way to beat it, to break free from its grasp. Because even if it feels like the cabin is calling him back, he knows that he doesn't belong there. Not anymore. Jake's new life began with a sense of cautious optimism. He found a job as a park ranger in a small, picturesque town nestled in the foothills of the mountains. The work was peaceful, and the people were kind. It was a welcome change from the turmoil he had left behind. He found a cozy little apartment near the park, and spent his days exploring the trails and learning about the local flora and fauna. One day, while walking through the park, he noticed a woman sitting on a bench, watching the birds fly overhead. There was something about her that caught his eye. She had a serene presence about her, a quiet strength that he found irresistible. He mustered up the courage to introduce himself, and soon discovered that her name was Sarah. They struck up a conversation, and before they knew it, they had spent the entire afternoon talking. Sarah was an artist, specializing in watercolors. She loved the natural beauty of the area and often found inspiration in the park. As they continued to spend time together, their feelings for each other grew stronger. They went on picnics, attended local festivals, and shared intimate moments under the stars. Jake had never known anyone like Sarah, and he couldn't help but feel that she was the missing piece in his life. Their relationship deepened, and they began to talk about their future together. Jake was hesitant at first, unsure if he could ever truly leave the horrors of the haunted cabin behind. But Sarah was patient and understanding, and she assured him that together, they could face anything. As they walked hand in hand through the park one day, they passed by an old, dilapidated cabin hidden behind a grove of trees. Jake paused for a moment, his heart racing, but then continued, taking Sarah's hand in his. "That cabin," he said, trying to sound casual. "It reminds me of the one I used to live in." Sarah looked at him with concern. "It's just a memory now," he reassured her. "A part of my past that I'm leaving behind." They walked on, lost in conversation, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the birds and the rustling leaves. Time passed, and Jake and Sarah grew closer. They were inseparable, and their love was a beacon of light in a world that could sometimes be dark and uncertain. They talked about moving in together, maybe starting a family one day. Life was good, and Jake finally felt at peace. One sunny afternoon, they decided to spend the day at the lake. The water was warm and inviting, and they swam and splashed together like children. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the water, Jake knew that this was the life he wanted. He looked at Sarah, her hair streaming behind her, her face flushed from the exercise, and he felt a profound sense of gratitude welling up inside him. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, taking her hand, "for giving me this chance at a new life, for showing me that there is love and happiness in the world." She smiled up at him, her eyes shining with tears. "And thank you for giving me the courage to let go of my past. I love you, Jake." As they stood there, arms wrapped around each other, the world seemed to fade away, and all that mattered was the two of them and their love. And as they leaned in for a kiss, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over him, knowing that he had truly left the horrors of the haunted cabin behind. Together, they would face whatever the future held, and they would do it with love and strength. Thank you so much for joining me on this cinematic journey. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Have you experienced a spine-chilling horror that left you trembling? Share your terrifying tale with us by emailing nightmarenetwork@hotmail.com, and we'd be thrilled to feature it on our platform. Until next time, happy movie watching.